Hi, Nick.
Hey, how are y'all doing?
Good.
Good, good. Thanks for having us. Members
Always,
of the public.
always.
Hi, everyone. This is Tyler calling in from sunny Salt Lake City.
Oh, Tyler, thank you. You're traveling too. That's right. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. I'm trying to get some video pulled up, but until then, is there any method you want to use, Emily, in terms of like getting in a queue for comment?
Are you just on the phone, so you don't have access to like the hand raise thing?
Right, and I don't want to just jump in and pounce on somebody. So.
Okay. Well, I'll try to remember to check in with you. And otherwise, honestly, I would say just speak up and.
Okay.
Just we all understand how this technology works. Just jump in if it feels, and if you're like, if somebody's not finished, we'll just make sure to then we'll know you're there. And Steve also has left. He I think it got posted some questions and stuff he wanted to raise, even though he probably can't actually be here in person. Okay, so we have a quorum plus, it sounds like, right, Todd? So you have started recording. Okay, great. So this is the Legislative Subcommittee of the Public Records Advisory Council meeting August 26, 2002. Our agenda, our first item is to approve the agenda. Basically, our meeting today is to set some dates for specific discussions about our proposed legislation on fee reform and cost of public records this close in fall, and move ahead with any area of agreements that we can today. I'm going to just read through the agenda very briefly for people who don't have access to it. Approve agenda, approve a proposed fall meeting calendar, which I'm not going to read completely, but assigning specific topics to specific dates. Review comments, suggestions, and proposed legislative language, seeking areas of agreement that need no or minimal discussion. Public comment period. Approve any areas of agreement. Any approval today, of course, will be, a temporary approval, as we will be finalizing a proposal later at the end of this, but just seeing if we can get anything together and out of the way. So I have a proposal to change the fall meeting calendar, but as far as the agenda goes, does anybody have anything they'd like to amend, anything they'd like to change on the agenda? Okay, I am not hearing anything, so do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda.
Thank you, Scott. Any seconds?
I second.
Great. All in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
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 Great.
Aye.
Thank you. Saw your hand, Emily. Thank you very much. Agenda is approved. Okay, so the first item is the fall meeting calendar. I assume all of the subcommittee members have that in front of them. I'd like to the proposal I'd like to make to change it is to actually keep those dates, but just kind of based on the comments that people put together on the draft legislation, I think we could structure it a little bit differently. And my proposal would be that we first discuss the idea of whether we want to have categories of requesters at all, starting with that. Then we move forward in our next meeting, and I would just assign these to the dates that we have. Then we discuss fees. What are appropriate fees? We discuss fee waivers or eliminating fees. Then we discuss deposits, and then we discuss what I've called guardrails, which means how do we take care of the, how do we make sure that we're making progress on the, the points that may be not common, but are extremely challenging to both requesters and to custodians. One being what we've talked about as quote unquote vexatious requesters, and one being more cities or counties or whatever level of government that have some obstructionist tactics or practices. So those would be my proposals to change. I'll say it again. So we talk about categories of requesters, fees, fee waivers, deposits, and then guardrails. I welcome comments on that. Other suggestions to amend the fall calendar?
I'll jump in, Emily. This is Tyler. I'll just say that the first two dates, changing the topics is fine. The first two dates would be difficult for me, and I imagine the September 23rd one, because that is the LC request deadline, and we'll be having legislative days. It might be difficult for Mark or anybody else who has to be in the building that day as well.
Okay, so September 9th and September 23rd would be hard for you and probably.
Yeah.
Any other comments on, well, okay, we can get dates on the calendar, I guess, first, and then deal with topics. So what we don't have to look at Fridays only. We can open up the calendar. Also, Steve asked me to say that for him, if we stay on Fridays, and he would prefer Fridays, the later in the day for him is better. 3 to 4 is better than 2 to 3 is better than 1 to 2. So I don't know what days. It's going to be hard to match all our calendars, but what are there alternates you'd suggest those weeks, Scott? Is there anybody else who has calendar set right now?
Emily, I may be unavailable on the 21st. I'll be doing a training, and as long as if the time is not set, I'll try to make it so that it's not during our meeting, but I don't expressly control that. It's sort of what the public body needs. But if anything, I'll be able to attend virtually and then have Yufeng run the administrative portion of like dealing with the recording and stuff. But I just don't know yet if I'll be able to attend on the 21st.
Okay. What about these other dates, September 30th, October 14th, or October 28th? Does anybody have conflict with those dates? Okay, so let's look at each of these individually. September 9th, is there another day that week that, like, could we meet? Sounds like we got an open mic or something. You check your settings, please, and mute yourself if that's you. September 8th, 7th, those possible replacement dates.
I could potentially do the morning of the 7th.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Tyler, are there other days that week of September 9th that would work for you? Is Tyler still here? No, Tyler.
Can you hear me?
Ah, there you are. Yeah.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay, sorry. I get these messages every time I go off mute that I've been muted or unmuted, and it blocks you all out. I'm free the rest of that week, so the 6th, 7th, or 8th would be fine. Okay,
6th, 7th, or 8th. Scott, you were saying the 7th in the morning might work for you. Do you have any availability in the afternoon? Just recognizing Steve's question about the comment that the afternoon was better for him.
After 2:30 on the 7th, I could be available.
Okay, that's Wednesday the 7th.
And I could be available Thursday the 8th in the afternoon.
Okay.
Until 3.
Until 3?
This is going to evolve into scheduling real quick.
Well, we're going to get through it though, because obviously we need to be in the same room to get the stuff done. So Wednesday the 7th from 2:30 till how late?
5.
Okay. Could we say on Wednesday that replace September 9th with September 7th between 3 and it's 2:30 to 4?
That will work for me, Emily.
That will work for you or won't work?
Yes.
For you? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Does anybody have objections to that? Okay. September 9th is going to be moved till September 7th between 2:30 and 4. September 23rd. That day sounds very bad for anybody who's doing legislative days, which we should be doing as well. What else that week? Would the 22nd work? Would the 26th, the following Monday, for example, work? would the 16th work instead? I think Todd had a conflict the 16th, which is why we moved it to the 23rd when we were initially scheduling. Let's just start with the 22nd. Does the 22nd work, especially with those legislative days? Is that going to be a conflict?
I'll tell you that the legislative days I have on my calendar run the 20th through the 23rd, and I'm sure that anybody who's a lobbyist is going to be pulled in at a moment's notice, so that whole week might be kind of a wash.
Okay. I think our options are to go back a week then, probably. Todd, I think you had said the 16th was not going to work for you when we initially were discussing scheduling.
I'll be away at a conference the 13th to the 16th. I could try to attend virtually. It just depends on where I'm at the conference, like in terms of panels and trainings and stuff.
Okay.
Later might be better because it's on the East Coast, so I'll be 3 hours ahead.
Oh, yeah. Good thinking. Okay. Well, what if we went for September 16th at that same 2:30 to 4 2:30 to 4 slot? That's a Friday. Does that would be on the East Coast 5:30 to 7. I'm seeing a couple thumbs up. I'm seeing Todd nod. Tyler, Michael.
Yeah, looks good.
Fantastic. Okay, and then October 21st, Todd, you aren't sure you're going to be at a training. We can get the tech. Yufeng can run the tech, but you just weren't sure if you'd be able to be here at all.
Right, but if it works for everyone else, I'd say go ahead.
Okay, let's just briefly, because you're pretty critical here too, as the author of our draft legislation. That would the 20th, that Thursday, for example, work for you better if we shifted it back a day? Or, for example, the 7th of October, which right now that week does not have a meeting.
Pursuant to our previous schedule, we actually do have a meeting that day on the 7th.
Oh, right, for like our regular 3-week thing.
Yeah.
Oh, well, should we snag that one? Is that going to work for? Oh wait, no, we just do right. Sorry, I'm forgetting I'm forgetting what we're doing. Moving on. Okay, right. We do have one the 7th. We do have one the 16th, the 30th. Okay. I guess I meant October 7th. I'm sorry. Is that what you mean? We do have one from our 3-week thing. Oh, okay. Should we move it to October 7th? Just cross off the 21st and do October 7th.
Oh, so this is moving the October 21st meeting to October 7th?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. So our new calendar then would be, and understanding things, not everyone's here to agree, and things may come up, and I really appreciate all the efforts people have been made to come to these meetings while they're traveling. So our new schedule would be September 7th, September 16th, September 30th, October 7th, and October 14th. All of them 2:30 to 4. And we would reserve this October 28th as a potential full PRAC meeting or for spillover discussion as we needed.
All of them 2:30 to 4, you said?
Yeah, well, any concern?
That's fine. That's
fine.
Different. Yeah. I can't come on the 30th. I don't know if you want to deal with that now, or I can just miss one. But
Yeah, that weekend we're gonna be in California starting Thursday through the Monday, so that's not gonna be great for me either. It's my daughter's 16th birthday.
Oh, how fun.
Gonna go to Disneyland.
But she does not get to go to California. You're
Well,
ready.
she has a sister who's in college down there, so it's a nice way to get to see her sister too.
That's awesome. Okay, so
And Emily, I hate to throw another wrench in the works, but by moving it that much later, I don't know week from week what my childcare after school pickup needs are, because my wife's schedule is very variable too, so I can't necessarily commit to that time for all these meetings now, other than to say I'll do my best.
what time would be more consistently workable for you?
The 1 to 3 or even earlier.
And yeah, we have Steve on the other end pushing for later.
I know.
Yeah. What if we
Like
did,
September 7th is fine for me. The September 16th is fine, but then the 30th, October 7th, and October 14th, I can't commit to those times now, although I'll try.
okay. Okay. Okay, so September 7th, 2:30 to 4 is okay. September 16th, 2:30 to 4 is okay. We are reviewing September 30th. October 7th, what if we made October 7th 2 to 3:30? That no better?
No, school ends at 3:15. So if their meetings are over at 3, they can hang around for a little bit before I get them, but
Okay, okay. What about 1:30 to 3? I'm just trying to also accommodate Steve.
that's fair.
1:30 to 3, and October 14th, 1:30 to 3. Okay.
Yeah, and once we settle on these dates, I'll get out new invites to everybody too.
Okay, and then September 30th, so we're looking for a 5th meeting date, basically, in those windows. So September 30th, the week of September 30th, how about September 28th? That's a Wednesday. I've got a no from Scott.
I'm at a conference the end of that week, so that whole end of that week's not gonna be good for me.
Okay, 27th? Is that early enough in the week for just to start with you, Scott?
That would work. 27th would work.
September 27th, how does that look for other people?
I can make that work.
Okay,
I can do that.
okay. So, and Todd, as far as your timing goes, is that one that you prefer to schedule 1:30 to 3 at this point?
Yes, please.
Okay. So now I have for 5 meetings, September 7th, 2:30 to 4, September 16th, 2:30 to 4, September 27th, 1:30 to 3, October 7th, 1:30 to 3, and October 14th, 1:30 to 3. Any objections at the moment? Okay, and then
I thought
reserve.
that was gonna
What?
be way more painful, Emily. You did that very smoothly.
Well, appreciate everybody speaking up. And October 28th, we're keeping that in reserve. So that would for a potential full PRAC meeting, that would typically be 1 to 3. So if you want to just maybe pencil that in as well. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So as far as what we're going to talk about, as I mentioned, I had some thoughts on how to restructure it from the first. The agenda has it, topics by section, which is great. But just looking at people's comments, it seemed like maybe we should attack sort of ideas in a logical sequence, which would be a little bit different than what I'd originally sent out. So just my proposal is that we first discuss whether we want to use categories of requesters as a basis, and then second, talk about what are appropriate fees. Third, talk about what are appropriate fee waivers. Fourth, talk about deposits. And fifth, make sure that we address sort of the extreme pain points. I'll also say that Steve felt that one meeting should tackle the question of automatic fee waivers for classes of requesters, and that one separate meeting should tackle 30-minute waivers. So it's he's suggesting things that are a little more detailed. I guess I'm thinking we need to get some agreement on some of the big picture stuff first. Comments, discussion. We can also send this out as a proposal and have people, email back their thoughts. But it'd be great to at least get the schedule, what we're going to talk about the first, meeting nailed down. And there'd be subcategories, obviously, of any of these.
Yeah, Emily, that makes a lot of sense to me. This is Michael. I think talking first about whether we want to adopt a system based on, I mean, we could talk about it in the context of class of requesters or based on FOIA, however you want to talk about it. I think that's sort of the first big question that I see presented by the fee proposal here.
Other thoughts?
The logical place to start.
So can I have a motion to temporarily or to approve the fall meeting calendar that I already ran through once, and to tentatively adopt this series of topics in that order, and we can adjust that as we go on, or are there other glaring
Emily, I would be happy to make that motion, but I honestly think that as the chair, that's your prerogative and you don't need us to approve it.
Okay, great. I had take some prerogative. We'll do that, and we'll send it out. But obviously, I'll send it out with further subcategories and with references to the sections, so that's we can all come knowing what we're trying to talk about. Okay, so item 3 on the agenda is to review what came in and look for areas of agreement. I'd be happy to share my screen if I can have that authority. I've got that massive markup document. So how to make a tidy, what was it, 4 pages, balloon to 16. I'm happy to share that. I hope that everyone on the subcommittee has it available to them as well, so you can see it on your own screens. And for the members of the public, what we're looking at is what's called Public Records Cost Reform 2023 LC 06/21/22 draft dash marked up 08/25/22. So what that is the quote unquote straw man draft legislation that Todd put forth in June with everyone's written comments as they came in, sort of sliced into the draft in the appropriate areas. All of the comments are highlighted in yellow. All the comments are identified by the person who submitted them. And I just want to make sure also any members of the public and also all subcommittee members know that anything that came in is posted in full. Some people, I think Scott just had comments in the doc, which I incorporated. I took out of the Word doc comment bubbles and stuck it in. I just made comments in the doc, but anybody who sent a separate comment, they're both incorporated into this document and independent on the website, so you can review those there.
Emily?
Yeah.
If I may, I just want to say, 1, I dropped the link to the document into our chat for anyone that can access it and need it.
Great.
And 2, I just want to applaud this remarkable synthesis you undertook to put all our comments into this one document. I think it's going to be incredibly helpful moving forward. So thank you for taking the time to do that.
Oh, thanks. That's really nice. Yeah, it's a lot of words. But I personally find it helpful to see all ideas laid out together in one place when I'm trying to think of something. I know other people attack information different ways, so feel free to do as you need. But yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And I really appreciate everybody getting their ideas in. So the idea today is to look for things we can potentially get through, we agree on. I open the floor to anybody who has found some areas of agreement. I have found some. Steve has mentioned a couple that he's asked us to share. But I'd like to open the floor, first of all, to anybody who's here and has identified something that we agree on, that we could either, we could move forward on, either agree that yes, we want some version of this in our final language, or we definitely don't want to have this in our final language. Okay, let me kick it off. There's one thing I thought, and Steve also actually identified that, that there may be consensus on the idea of a transparency by design task force. If you look on the document, it would be, I'm gonna just find the right page. Yeah, it's on page 13, coming under actually the proposal to expand the public records law to require data dictionaries and other type of support to like understand the data in specific kind of structured requests. But the there's a lot of comments on that. Scott mentioned that might make it like really like create more work that a requester doesn't even want. I noted that, yeah, it might not be necessary if somebody doesn't want it, just creating more work. So that was, there's definitely, I think that came out of some testimony where people had experience where it would be really helpful to get that stuff. And Michael notes that already under public records laws, public bodies should be required to provide that metadata. So maybe we can agree on just noting that metadata is in fact covered under public records laws somewhere in our even like in the preamble or something like that. But more specifically, maybe Steve has a comment about proposing a transparency by design task force to report to the legislature by June 2024. And it would, he lists people that would be on it and a mission. So that I thought maybe something that we would potentially agree on in concept. Can I get a sense of that from people? Let me just see.
I think that, Emily, I think that a task force is like the stereotypical placeholder legislation. So if we end up only proposing that, people will think it's just a placeholder. But I mean, it makes sense to me that we would have a group focused on this. I think there have been some fairly organized discussions around this topic in the past. Ironically enough, Steve is the person in our group who would know best. So if Steve thinks that a formal task force is a good idea, it's hard for me to imagine what any objection would be to that. So you can count me as on board, I guess.
I think, I don't want to speak for Steve, he's on a plane, but my sense is like he feels like there are bits and pieces of this action going forward, and it's been under discussion for lots of years. And there seems like to be general consensus in this, records community that would be a great place to head, that agencies would like that kind of support and putting some money behind that. And, it's a long-term kind of thing, right? Transparency by design. I get the sense that the idea of making it a task force, and Michael, just to be clear, this would be like spinning this off from this legislation or incorporating it into this legislation, but only for this small piece, right? Not like the legislation as a whole as a task force, but including a task force as one thing to happen to move ahead with advancing transparency generally. But it would only be really to address a very small piece of what's in this bill. So it wouldn't be a task force only from this committee.
Yeah, that was a little bit of, I was trying to make a joke, but it was too inside baseball.
Other comments or thoughts?
I have one.
Yeah, please.
I'm supportive of the creation of a task force. I think that's a good idea, but it's more broadly focused on like procurement and construction of like data systems, which is great and important and we need. It doesn't do anything to address, in the meantime, how public bodies communicate with requesters for more complicated or voluminous requests related to digital records. As we've seen, email or requests for email are becoming like the de facto public records request. There's a lack of understanding, I think, on the requester side as to what goes into that to provide responsive records in a timely and efficient manner. And public bodies themselves don't always seem inclined to communicate some of those difficulties to requesters or work closely with them at the outset so that the requester understands the landscape of information they're seeking. So I think if we're going to move forward with any sort of cost reform proposal, we need to do something in there now that helps requesters and public bodies better communicate about these issues as a mandate to provide these records and to charge for it. So I think the task force can sort of be this overarching idea that maybe we'll fix things further down the road, but I don't think we should walk away from improving communication now as well, even if it's a lesser ask. And for instance, I put the term metadata in there because it's one that comes up a lot, but maybe this concept could be modified along the lines of like, if necessary or to effectuate a public records request, communicate terms as needed, including but not limited to things like what is named in here rather than making it or leaving it in its current form. I guess that's it.
Right, because Steve's comment is much broader. And I think that what I'm hearing you talk about there, Todd, is communication, which actually is a question I have about the overall legislation, like how much do we want this sort of inculcated with the idea, but the incentives really built in to encourage, communication and working together, and how overt do we want to be about that? So I don't know that I hear you that what you're trying to address here in this section is slightly different than all the things that Steve is trying to address in a task force. But it may be that it folds in a little bit differently, thinking about this communication question. Other comments and thoughts?
Well, Emily, I see that Nick Budnick has his hand up. I don't know if you're taking public commentary now, but as a member of the media, he might be able to shed light on that side of the perspective.
Oh, thank you. I didn't notice, Nick. Thanks. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't mean to jump in, but a big part of the early discussion and in the legislature about what the PRAC would do and the public records advocate would be to formulate best practices for how the public and requesters engage. So I don't know that a task force is necessarily going to be as productive as, say, the PRAC having a subcommittee formulating best practices. You've already accepted a bunch of comment, and honestly, the people you're in touch with would be a huge help, I think, to you to formulate, for instance, a decision tree. But I mean, SBJ is strongly supportive of that, and we've supported that from the beginning. That the PRAC and the advocate take this on, and your website could be a tremendous resource for people.
Can I just ask Nick a question? I think I'm understanding you to say, Nick, that you like Steve's idea, except where he proposes the task force, and that is instead something we should tell the larger PRAC to either work on or to create a subcommittee to address.
I apologize. I was restricting my comment to the focus on best practices that Todd raised about how gatekeepers engage with the public and vice versa. I think that doesn't need to be in a task force. As far as a task force on transparency by design, I feel like whether it's a task force or the PRAC, I think it's a worthwhile investment of time. I think the PRAC it's well within the PRAC's statutory authority of SB 106. It's squarely in that wheelhouse, for what it's worth.
Yeah, I think the question is, like, that's a great reminder that we could certainly have a subcommittee on best practices. I think what we're trying to do here is put some of those best, like, identify them and put them into legislation, right? Into improving, along with the cost of public records, the communication around public records, which, costs can be tangled up in. So I'm hearing that maybe we, like, an ongoing thing would be a regular standing subcommittee to keep developing best practices and putting them out there through Todd's office, possibly through legislation. I think and we're also trying to figure out what best practices can we put into statute at this point in this format.
Yeah, well, maybe I can just suggest that if our goal right now is to identify areas of agreement about what could reasonably be in our fee proposal, that I'm not going to agree to putting stuff like that in a fee proposal, because I think it is going to add so much political complexity to what is already going to be politically complex. And we're going to have discussions about, mandatory communication on top of like discussions about the straightforward money. And neither one of those is going to be easy. And I don't think that expanding the scope of what we're trying to do is ultimately going to be good for our bill. I think if we're tasked with addressing fees, or that's the thing we've chosen rather to address first, that we should really just try to stick to it. And I understand the argument that all these things play into the cost of public records, or the perceived cost. I think, Steve's suggestion is not really a substantive one, so it doesn't give me much heartburn to say the legislature should create a task force to look at transparency by design. I think it does have a direct potential tie to cost, in that if the technology is there to make public records more readily accessible, the cost will presumably go down for both sides. But if we were going into sort of more detail in terms of like what public bodies had to do in their procurements, I would be equally opposed to that kind of sort of mission creep, because I just think the more we try to do, the less likely we are to accomplish anything.
Okay, so the thing I'm hearing you say is, you're not opposed for this idea of a transparency by design task force. It sounds like you don't think that should be included in the bill, just like that proposal of a task force that could be set aside as like a number 2 thing or a separate thing. So have I got those 2 things right, Michael?
I mean, I don't think it's a great idea to put a task force in the bill, but I'm not like really opposed to it, because it seems like not anything anyone can object to. It just creates process that is fine. Like,
Okay.
what I don't want are sort of extraneous things that are going to create fights, and that doesn't seem like one.
Okay.
This is Tyler, if I can chime in.
Please.
I'll just kind of second Michael here. And the only thing that I think of a task force, right, it's easy to say yes to, because it's not a substantive, shall have any sort of mandate. But what I have seen from a lot of task force bills, and I mean, even this one, like the draft language we're looking at says city or county. And of course, I would say we should have cities and counties. And anytime we kind of try to set a table, even with a task force bill, it does turn into often a political fight of like who should be at the table. And I would just echo Michael's concern. I think if we stay narrow and focused on the fee issue for this first go round, we're going to just have a greater chance of success. And if we're really going to, stick our necks out for something that could doom the bill politically, like let's make sure the juice is worth the squeeze.
Great, thank you. Other comments?
Emily, I'll just add, I defer to those who know more about the legislative process than me. So I hear and accept Michael's and Tyler's concerns. And I do think we should focus on these core aspects that matter most in terms of cost reform. But that being said, once those are agreed to, I definitely want to continue talking about communication, either requirements or recommendations to effectuate these core changes that we want to make happen. Because we heard over and over from the requester side that, they don't know what they're being charged for and why. And we've heard from public bodies that they want more guardrails and guidance about how to process public records requests. And I think it's possible that we could accomplish some of those goals through communication recommendations or requirements that are expressly tied to these other core aspects that we all agree to. So if anything, maybe we table some of these concerns until we've really dug in and agreed to on these core concepts of cost reform.
Right.
These seem like great ideas, honestly, for a second for the next project of this subcommittee. Like, I don't disagree at all with the idea that these are issues that people care about. I worry that they're not quite on all 4 corners with what we're trying to address, and that every little deviation is just going to bring out people who don't like somewhere we're going in a like just the time we've spent talking about this today is maybe just a very small scale example of like how our energy will be dissipated.
I'm thinking of specific lines in the bill where, and Todd, you may be able to point to these faster, where, for example, you are rewarded, both parties are rewarded if they work together. They are not rewarded if they don't, for example. Those are the kinds of like carrots and sticks you're trying to incorporate, use fees somehow to encourage the kind of communication everybody says actually makes the whole process easier. Is that right? That seems laced through some of the proposals here that we get to, one-on-one specifically in these later meetings. But and I think what I'm hearing you say, Todd, is that's an important effort, this leveraging behavior through fees, that you'd like to continue to explore. And Michael, I'm not sure. Are you saying that that's like trying to leverage behavior through fees is distracting? Is not focused?
I mean, I don't know what specifically you're thinking about. I'm not immediately calling to mind provisions of the proposal that were about that, unless it's things like, you can only charge a deposit if you first create an inventory. I mean, I don't think that, for example, is a good idea. First of all, I think the deposit question is kind of unaddressed entirely in statute, and I think that's okay. I would worry that if we started putting it into statute, that more people would start doing it, and then they would also have to create inventories. So then they would create inventories, and then that would be burdensome. And then they would have another complaint about the burdensomeness of the process. So I mean, I guess, if anything that is actually has a direct tie to fee, I think is worth our time talking about in this committee on our current task. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to think it's a good idea, but there are some things that are in here that just really don't have that tie at all, like increasing appeal times or times for public bodies to decide whether to appeal. And I don't know, the more we can cut that stuff out in particular, the better. And then the fee stuff, I think we just need to kind of discuss it as it comes up. But for purposes of this discussion, really all I'm trying to say is I don't think we can put any of that on the list of consensus items that we don't need to talk about.
Okay, well, here's a suggestion. It may be that we can put this idea of really prioritizing transparency for design as a next step after we're done with this legislation. We may be able to agree to not include that task force idea in this legislation, for example. So let's think about that for a second. And I have a couple other areas of potential agreement that I've identified. One is the idea, actually it's a pretty nitty-gritty one, of that agencies need to post their policy, their public records policy publicly, and include an educational grace period before requiring that. That's a really tiny little detail that is not, it's fee related in the sense that their fee policy would be part of their policy. And there was a comment, I can't remember if it's from Scott or Tyler, about needing a grace period for people to do that. But is that a tiny thing that we could agree on that we'd like to see in this legislation? Any thoughts on that?
Emily, if I may, so are you including the other side of that if they don't post their policy, they can't charge fees?
Oh, well, that did seem a little more controversial, I guess.
Because public bodies are already mandated to post publicly their written public records policy, including fee custodians and fee schedules. But there's, the other part I added is because there's currently no teeth to it.
I see. That's right. Right. Well, let's discuss that. Is that something that we all agree on? Both, like, we could agree, yes, we want to keep that in this draft legislation. You're putting some teeth in this current law of that you're supposed to post your fee your records policy, including fees.
Can someone remind us where this is in the policy?
Yeah, it's on page 13 in the marked up version. It starts expand ORS 192.3247 to include that a public body must post their public records. You can search for post and you'll find it.
Thank you.
Okay, that's something.
Can I ask what it means? Like what does it mean that they have to have it posted publicly for purposes of the teeth that we would be adding to this? Like obviously on their website if they have one is being proposed, but for a public body that for one of Mark's clients, like what would be sufficient? And I guess if we don't know what it means, we probably shouldn't agree to it right now.
Okay, like do you have an example? Do you know an example of one of Mark's clients that, I'm sorry, he's not here, that doesn't have a website?
I'm sure Mark would be able to give us many. I'm sorry he's not here too, but he represents like, you know, sewer districts and small. He's always talking about how tiny his clients are. If it just
I think
means that if you
I was
have a
going to say, I think that there are like road districts that like, you know, they post their, or like a neighborhood association or something, you might physically post, you know, your agenda once a week on literally like a town square bulletin board.
Yeah, or
So I wonder what this would mean.
I mean, right now it's not defined in the law, right? Of being, but it's required that they post publicly, but it's not defined. So I think the definition we would be adding that if you know, if it's on your website, it's got to be there. I mean, if there are agencies, as Todd has said, that there don't have a publicly posted public records policy, and I mean, Todd, are these agencies that don't have it on their website? I mean, that seems like something that's pretty common sense, and we would want to have people doing. If they don't have a website, yeah, next best thing. You know, everybody communicates with their constituents somehow. But it does seem a bit egregious, right? There's a law that you're supposed to share your public records policy, and it's not there.
I think as a general comment, this is one of the things that I identified as, this is Tyler, by the way, identified as something that counties would likely support, again, because we're already required to do this. However, I think going back to one of Todd's earlier comments on the Transparency by Design Task Force, I think that this is one of those like helping with communication type ideas that could inadvertently, before we get into any conversation about deposits or waivers or anything, like just increasing the actual transparency and communication, where if you can go through and look at a post policy and see a matrix, you end up with a lot less confusion on everybody's part about, you know, what constitutes reasonable. And it gives some assurance to the requesters that they're being treated the same as everybody else, because you're comparing apples to apples rather than just being told, you know, this is reasonable and not being given an explanation if you can look at the policy. So all that to say, yeah, we supported this. I do really appreciate Michael speaking up on behalf of the small districts or the special districts, because we would really need to get that information, because simply saying you're required to post it on a website would be troubling if the entity in fact does not have a website.
Yeah, right now the wording in this draft language is website if they have it. I suppose you could add something like, you know, and if they don't, you know, whatever method they traditionally communicate publicly with their constituents. I'm not a lawyer. I don't write law language that I can sure is going to hold up, but so my sense is like that kind of stuff could be worked out. Like, what is public communication? Like I said, it's already law. So it would be a clarification that a website would be part of it. Maybe we could develop that a little further. There is this second part of, if they don't do that, then you can't charge fees. And then Tyler suggested we would certainly need some education time period for that. Does that sound like something we could agree we'd like to have in this law, or we'd like to discuss it further when we're talking about fees and carrots and sticks? Emily, you have your hand up. Emily Gothard.
I would think if they didn't have a website, maybe it would just be that they had it available upon request. But yeah, I mean, that doesn't seem like a very controversial proposal to me to have a policy for the fees you're going to charge.
I agree with Emily. Seems reasonable.
As you can imagine, I agree as well, and it has the benefit of merely updating or strengthening an existing requirement too, with lead-in time.
What about this second part? What are people's thoughts? And I know I don't have I don't have full consensus on the first part of it, but what are people's thoughts about the second part in the proposal of a public body is not permitted to recoup costs from a requester if that is not posted, if they have a website, or available upon request if they don't?
It really does seem sensible to me, Mrs. Michael, but my only caveat here is I think we should hear from Mark in particular and sort of make sure that we're comfortable that we've got a clear rule so that, you know, small public bodies that maybe don't have websites can look at the statute and just know what they're supposed to do. I think you guys have got suggestions that seem reasonable to me, like however you post notice, although it would be kind of weird to have it like a fee schedule on the bulletin board at the local like grocery store or whatever, just sitting there forever seems a little strange. But I mean, it seems like a reasonable consequence for failure to do a fairly simple thing.
Okay, let's I'm gonna put that in the bucket of like probably, and let's revisit. I wonder if posting it on the grocery store would actually people realize like help for education, be like, oh, I can request public records or whatever. I have a district that's doing something here. So maybe who knows I guess I'm one of those people who read the grocery store bulletin board. All right, moving forward. I wonder if there is consensus. This came from Steve as an area of potential agreement he found was the desirable of, I believe he meant like some state funds. I don't know. He said the sentence is the desirability of funds for disclosure. And Todd, did you have a better sense of what Steve was suggesting when he saw that as an area of possible agreement? I see in here an area of agreement that, I mean, just jumping off of what Steve wrote, that, you know, there's definitely a need expressed for some backstop funds, like, for example, if someone doesn't, you know, makes a request and doesn't come back and pay for it like they said they would. But just overall, it seems like there's a sense that that they're looking for additional support for public records would be desirable. Whether, I think if anybody did there were some suggestions in, I think, that analysis Steve did about public records, but looking for money to support the costs of transparency outside of simply fee recovery, like recovery through fees. Is there support for that? Is that it's sort of hinted at different places in this, so it's not direct language, but I don't know, thoughts?
Well, I have another. Oh, go ahead, Tom.
Sorry, Michael. Where is that comment currently in the draft?
Yeah, it was in this. It was in this note he sent that should be posted. I think you posted this morning of questions he wanted to raise because he wasn't here. He said, I think agreement might be reached today on the desirability of funds for disclosure. And one area I had identified also as possible, or a possible agreement was, broadening, like not relying on fees alone as, I mean, we don't, right? They don't cover costs already, but like we've talked a lot about, like, could we make a state pool? Is there some state backup for small districts in particular? That sort of thing has come up in discussions a lot. So, but that's to answer your question, Todd, that was where the note from Steve comes from. I'm not entirely sure what he meant, but that's how I interpreted it. how it resonated along with something I was thinking about. Go ahead.
Well, based on his prior comments that I can recall, I think he probably is referring to a central state pot. And since you asked me, I'm definitely in favor of exploring some sort of state funding and or centralized public records officers for smaller public, even state and local public bodies that have difficulty processing on their own. But I'm not necessarily in favor of introducing either of those concepts into this bill, because I think those would be very distracting conversations that would take away from these core concepts we're looking to implement. I'm open to the conversation. I'm just weary at this point about making it part of the current concept.
I'm going to act against character and completely agree with Todd Albert. Also, I think it is a guaranteed fiscal impact statement. It means you will be going to Ways and Means if you ask for that. And I think there are some things we could do that might end up in Ways and Means anyway, but hopefully not with the stakeholders we've assembled here. I think one of the things that we heard, that I got out of all of the things we heard anyway, is that public bodies aren't really collecting a lot of money from especially the public interest type requesters. So I think there are things we might be able to do that will keep us out of Ways and Means and potentially avoid a fiscal. And this is not one of them. So.
Okay. Any other comments on this?
Well, but it is a good idea, I think. Like Todd, I agree that it would be a good idea, and maybe something we want to propose separately.
Okay.
This is Tyler. I'll agree with Michael. Guaranteed fiscal on this one, but I guess it got to my question, and it's probably is for Steve. I mean, are we talking funds for requestors or requestees? It's one of those concepts that I think, like, good concept just needs a lot more discussion and refining. And to Michael's point, would put it guaranteed in the Ways and Means world, which just makes it a harder fight.
Okay. All right. Okay, so one last area that I thought there might be agreement on, and this is I thought there might be potential agreement to not include this in the bill, similarly to like everything else we've talked about so far. And that is sections 5 and 6, the changes to the appeals process. There was a number of different comments on that, and they may not did not seem like it was directly relevant to fees, although obviously putting some teeth into enforcing fee waivers is part of the whole system. But I was wondering if moving those to another time, because they're not directly related to charges, would be something we could agree on. Thoughts?
This is Tyler. I'll speak up, and it was one of the things that I listed as something that might be low-hanging fruit that we could agree on. And I guess the way that I thought about increasing the adjudication time or the time for public bodies to appeal was it just allows more time for communication between requester and requestee without the pressure cooker of, okay, we're going to go to court if we don't sort this out. I mean, indirect, sure, but just allowing more time for cooler heads to prevail, to go back and forth and let people actually refine their searches before everybody gets dragged to court seems like it could bring down costs. But so I guess my question, for while I'm sort of playing devil's advocate here, is was there any, other than the fact that maybe it's not in some people's mind core related to what we were trying to discuss, is it a bad idea? Does anybody think it's a bad idea?
This is Michael. I'm sure there are people who think it's a bad idea. I don't think that the reporter community would take very kindly to it. And again, because it's a side fight, it just feels to me like we would be wise to take Emily's suggestion and have further discussions. I mean, I have heard, as Todd has, that the DAs are, many DAs anyway, are not entirely sure they want this book of business at all. And that is obviously a legitimate public records policy issue that the PRAC has jurisdiction to think about and make recommendations on. It's not a fee recommendation, and I don't think it's as straightforward as your comment suggests, Tyler. I really don't.
I see in the chat that Nick wants to weigh in on this. So you referenced the reporter community, Michael. Nick, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you very much. I addressed this in our written comments as well that we submitted a little bit before the meeting started. But there's a lot of time already in the law for the two sides to come together, and the way the law works, agencies that follow the statutory guidelines on responding and engaging with a requester have ample time to talk and adjudicate. And the other thing is the DA at times will ask, often will ask for more time before issuing and appealing, and they often use that time to encourage both sides to come to a compromise. It's one of the kind of unwritten aspects of our appeals process that works really well, at least often works well. And so any extension of the adjudication timeline, however, will lead to a lot of delays that are a problem already. And the written testimony we've submitted gets into that in more detail. But oftentimes the adjudication timeline is the real life timeline under which clearly public records are requested, simply because some agencies don't follow statutory obligations that the legislature has given them to weigh the legalities of a request before denying it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks you, Nick. Any other comments on this possibility of we can agree to set these aside as well for later? Okay. Okay, well, that covers everything that I had identified as an area of agreement. Anybody else find anything? And I'll run through. I mean, I think I heard some different things. I'll summarize in a minute. But anybody else hear areas of potential agreement that we might be able to work through today?
I'm gonna float one that I think is related to cost. That is, it's a little bit of a spin on what is in Todd's proposal, but I think it's within the spirit of it, which is the idea that public bodies should have to charge for the lowest compensated employee capable of performing the work. That seems to me like it is current law, but it's current case law. And the only difference between what Todd wrote and what I said is that I would say you have to charge for someone who's at the lowest level, and I don't really care who you use. But that seems like a fee issue that we maybe could all agree on.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Comments?
Being a non-attorney, Tyler, again, can somebody walk me through the difference between like binding case law and what a statutory obligation that we would be proposing would look like?
I mean, I think the difference would just be that when you open the law, it's written there, and public bodies are therefore more likely to be aware of it than they are of what the Court of Appeals said in a opinion 20 years ago. Well, the idea would be to codify what is already required. Just they won't need their lawyer to tell them it's required. They'll just know.
Yeah, I mean, Emily, this is an odd day when Michael and I are agreeing so much, but I definitely agree with what Michael's saying, and Tyler, I hope that's an adequate explanation, because the truth is it is just laying out in simple language in the existing law what case law already requires public employees to do. And I happen to hear from the public records officer of a large state agency yesterday who said they are already essentially doing that she never is able to charge her own FTE because the agencies determine essentially, I think the work can be done at a lower pay level and is sort of in line with the DAS fee schedule. So some agencies are already doing this, but to the extent we can codify it and make everyone aware, that's why it's in there.
So this is Tyler, and those are great answers. My question is, like I'm thinking if we go down the route of, like I'll pick on my own organization, right? If AOC gets a request and we farm out to external counsel, would we still be allowed to bill at that rate? I mean, that'd be the actual cost of external counsel. And then say we fold in, one of our admin folks to do the actual photocopying or something. Would it presuppose that one person's doing it all, or could you still piecemeal out different aspects of fulfilling the request?
Tyler, this is Todd. Based on my understanding of the case, different aspects of the request can be performed by a different person. It's whomever is the most appropriate level of an FTE to do that work. So if you need your attorney to review for redactions because it's highly specialized items, it'd be appropriate to charge the attorney's rate. If an admin who has experience with public records law can do those redactions because they're ones you use all the time, then you should be charging at that admin rate. So you can break up a request and for each section use the appropriate level FTE to do that section of the work. And if that person wasn't available and a higher level manager had to do it, but they were essentially overqualified, you would then be charging at the lower rate, even though they're doing the work, the higher FTE.
Got it. Thank you. I guess to think about, I'm thinking of my small counties that might be wearing, 4 different hats, and I'm just wondering if you run into a capacity issue ever where it does get kicked up to somebody, I don't know if it goes to your county council, but regularly it's your clerk or whoever might be at a lower pay scale, and it does sound like counties might end up eating some cost if it's somebody at a not getting paid at their actual rate because they're overqualified.
Well, if I could just add one more thing that might be helpful, this is already required, as we said, because it is the law of the land, which means any public body that's not doing this now can potentially be on the hook to get dinged, even if it's just being told, you've charged too much and need to refund some of these fees. It's already what's required, kind of like having the publicly posted policy. This is just would be more making sure everybody knows about it. Yeah. I guess long story short, yes, this is binding already. Codifying it seems fine. I just wanted to work through that, and thank you all for indulging me.
Yeah, great. Thank you all. Other areas that anyone's identified of potential agreement?
Oh, I have one other, but this might be too closely linked to the rest of what we want to do, or maybe isn't agreed upon enough, but essentially that commercial requesters should always pay full freight and media is not considered commercial.
So yeah, it does presuppose that we want to go into categories of requesters. I think that deserves actually quite a bit of discussion, but that may be making some assumptions. I know there was at least, I think Emily, you had a comment raising some questions about the categories generally. I'm just trying to flip back to see if other concerns came up about moving toward that type of FOIA model. But maybe we should do this. I'm going to propose a straw poll here. This in no way would preclude talking about categories as a general model going forward in our next meeting. Let me reiterate, I think that deserves a great deal of discussion. It would be a significant shift for Oregon, but just sort of a straw poll. Where are people on that? Could we go around and have folks just say in like one sentence, yes, but, no, and? I'm going to pick on you, Todd, to start. Since you wrote the legislation, I think you're going to say, yes, that's the way you think we should be going.
Okay, just restate the proposition for me, please.
I'm trying to get a sense of like whether people generally think yeah, categories are probably the way we want to go, or generally think, nope, or generally think, I really don't know, I have to discuss it more.
And we're saying specifically categories of requesters right now, right? Not breaking up fees into express categories as well,
Yeah,
just.
because that's a precursor for what you propose that we might agree on, that if we go into categories, that commercial people would always pay full freight.
Recognizing that we need much further discussion on this, I am in favor of creating categories of requesters in Oregon law.
Okay. And again, total straw poll, free to change your mind through discussion. Scott, you want to get us a way to weigh in?
Rereading what I wrote 2 months ago about this one, I think I'm still a little leery. I'm not against exploring it further, but at this point, I'm a little leery. Just because the advice I've received over the years, there's only so far a public body is supposed to inquire as to what the information will be used for. And if we're starting to have to categorize what someone's coming to us, we have to then start asking questions. But I'm not saying no. I'm just saying I'm leery and open to the conversation. Right in the middle. How's that sound?
Perfect. Emily?
Sorry, sometimes my mute button takes forever to come off. Okay. I would say that I do not support it as currently proposed. I have a lot of concerns about, you know, just about anyone like saying, well, I'm a member of the media, or I still think that there should be a public interest test for establishing a fee waiver, that it's actually benefiting the public, because I feel like the broad fee waivers proposed could really inundate public employees with requests, and would take away from their ability to do other work that the public body is tasked with. I mean, I think some category discussion is important. I mean, like I support, and this actually seemed like an area that would need refinement too, but that there may be some consensus on, is not no fee for the requester's own files or records, except with more refinement, potentially up to a certain limit or possible exemptions.
Michael?
Sorry, my mute was also on, and I wasn't taking forever to come off it. I was just talking into it. So sorry. I don't know. I think there's a lot to say in favor of the FOIA fee model. And again, I have doubts that it would really have much of a fiscal impact. I do have fears that it would be easy to tank by attaching a fiscal impact statement to it. And I'm not sure how well policed those statements are. So it might be a good idea that has a harder political path than it should. And I'm also open to other ideas. To me, it's intriguing, but I want to talk a lot more about it. So there you go. I do kind of generally agree still that commercial requesters ought to pay for their requests, and I think that can be true across different models of fee reform, right? It can be true under our existing fee structure too, because we currently authorize fee waivers in the public interest, which typically are not going to be available if you're requesting information to use it for your private financial gain. So I think even without sort of agreeing on categories, the idea that Todd is floating, that if you're looking to get public records in order to make money off the public records, you should be expected to pay the full cost regardless of the system, is actually a principle that I'm inclined to agree with.
I see. So are you saying, because you're saying right now, commercial requesters don't get public interest waivers, but they don't pay the full cost. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, they can be required to, and I think whatever we do, that should remain the case.
Should it go I mean, I guess Todd, well, let me finish this straw poll, but circle back to you, Todd, maybe what you want to find out if there's a common agreement on full freight for commercial, not just as an option, but, or maybe it's maybe an option, maybe a requirement. But let's finish this. Tyler, where do you feel like you're sitting right now on the category concept?
Well, this is going to echo Scott and Emily. Yeah, I'll be brave. I'll say no, at least in 2023. It would just take a lot more to think through. Do we really want to go the route of granting different access based on who you are? And of course, I'll just remind the group, I think this is what killed a proposal out of the PRAC before, was trying to tier different types of requesters, and we all got all tied in knots about definitions about who fit into each tier. So to save our time with a limited time coming before a legislative session, I think this is one that we could table.
Okay. And I think it's definitely worth exploring. I am sort of tired of the idea that we can never get anything done because we can't define things. Other states do it successfully. The federal government does it successfully. And so I think there's solutions to a lot of the concerns raised. I have some questions if it would solve all the problems that we're actually trying to solve here. So I'm not sure it's the right system for those reasons. So it sounds like we're all kind of in the middle, which is good. This is the next thing we're going to talk about at our next meeting. To go back to what Todd was bringing up as a possible point of agreement, of commercial requesters, no matter the system, like whether there's an actually defined category that triggers by law what you pay or what you pay for. That idea that commercial requesters either must pay full actual cost or agencies can charge full actual cost. So that's not currently, that would be a change. Is that what you're saying, Todd?
Well, under the current system, a commercial requester, well, first of all, as we learned, no public body seems to ever recoup its actual full cost for providing records. So no one is paying full cost at this point, it would seem. However, commercial requesters are the ones that generally don't squabble with fee estimates and pay them in full when required to pay. So under the current system, that's essentially happening anyway. So I guess it'd be hard to get agreement now that commercial requesters should pay full freight under any system, because then that envisions some sort of categorization that if we're not in favor of, we're not going to do. So I don't really know how to, in what terms to couch any question to the subcommittee at this point. So maybe we should just leave it alone for now.
Okay. Comments on that though? Do people see ways that this idea of, recouping more money from commercial requesters is something that would be attractive to agencies?
I'm not super in favor of telling anyone they have to charge more than they're charging for public records in any context. I think that would be a weird thing for us to do.
Even though that's something that keeps coming up, that fees aren't covering costs?
I mean, you might be able to talk me into it, Emily, but like right now, it just feels like it would be a weird thing for us to say.
Yeah, I think it makes more sense if agencies want to, that they do that. I guess I would question why any agency wouldn't yeah, I guess that's what I would not understand fully. Like, why wouldn't you, right? Since it's public information, somebody's making money off it. I guess we heard some testimony about a lot of the added on commercial stuff is in fact an add-on. So, what they're not directly selling public information in that simple way. They're making it more useful in the way it's packaged or something like that. But yeah, I don't know. Scott or Tyler, Emily, thoughts on that?
Well, this is Tyler. I mean, I think you know, like when I gave my no answer, again, it was going back to the presupposition that we're going to start tiering folks. I guess for the most part, right, if commercial requests, I guess I get back to like, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And I think it cuts both ways. To Michael's point, if you start telling people what they have to charge or what they are required to not charge, I just think if the status quo right now, we know that public bodies aren't recouping full costs. I think that's largely because they are using that discretion to grant waivers. The more we start spelling out explicitly who has to pay and who doesn't, I think we're gonna, that's a double-edged sword. I think we're gonna start losing discretion, and then people will, their individual circumstances won't be taken into account, and we might end up with greater fees all around. So sorry, that got a little bit away from commercial. Point being, I think commercial folks are largely paying right now. So I don't know if we need to mess with that in this round of legislation.
Right. We heard Todd say that generally they don't contest, commercial requesters wouldn't contest fees and stuff like that, sort of part of doing business. I guess we didn't really hear any testimony that I recall, maybe somebody else recalls, as to whether agencies are actually charging full costs to, like, you know, requesting full costs to commercial requesters. Anyone recall?
I don't recall testimony that, you know, I'm relatively new. I'm still new, so I perhaps haven't heard everything, but I know from what I've heard from my fellow recorders at the city level, when we get a request for commercial, most cities aren't shy about, you know, putting a full bill if someone's asking for a lot of data. It'll take some time for us to pull. Some of these things over time, kind of tying to a conversation we had earlier, as cities have gotten more adept at using electronic systems, these requests from commercial agencies that we get annually, like the one for everyone's salary and contact information, that's sort of an annual thing that we all get, it's pretty on autopilot now. We have systems that can pull it, but when we have a big request, I've seen, and I've in a minimal experience here at Milwaukee, we've charged full to corporate, to commercial interest. So I guess maybe part of me is wondering, I haven't observed it, and I don't want to speak for Tyler, but maybe Tyler suggested a second ago that it wasn't as big of an issue, perhaps, but it definitely sounds like the committee has heard testimony that it is at certain levels. So
Todd, when you wanted to check if people felt like the commercial requesters would pay full, in the context of, like, you know, any system, whether it's categorized or not, what are you hearing now?
I'm hearing that I want to withdraw that suggestion. People raise important points, and I don't see a broad consensus. And I do think my own opinions on what we say about this will be shaped by what we ultimately decide to do with categories. And I thought I was trying to just find an area of agreement that wasn't too controversial as a basis for future work. I don't think it's a problem now for public bodies, kind of like what Scott said, that they essentially already have that ability to charge and are doing it, but it isn't always necessary. I definitely, yeah, so I'm happy to withdraw that for now, and let's roll it back into the larger discussion we're going to have about categories.
Okay, any other suggestions of areas of potential agreement? I'll run through what I think I've heard today, and we can go ahead and decide if we want to make any decisions.
There, you know, one of the, sorry, it's hard on the phone. This is Tyler. One of the things that I was intrigued by was just clarifying search, duplication, and review. You know, in my mind, I thought it kind of came with like the posting of the public records policy. If you're a requester and you get given an itemized receipt of like, here's what search costs, here's what duplication costs, here's what review costs, it could, you know, somewhat inadvertently bring down fees. My thought was that if you're getting that sort of like itemized level breakdown of your cost, what you could mitigate against is a public body just giving a figure and then just saying that's reasonable, but the requester really has no idea why. And honestly, I think this helps public bodies plead their case. If you say, you know, and here's what review costs over 4,000 records, and here's what that cost breaks down to for legal review. I think it makes it more understandable for requesters if they get these bills, you know, that are $1,000 and they think that's insane. At least we have, you know, it's defensible for the public body to say, well, this is the actual cost of it.
I was going to say the exact same thing, same spot.
Okay, so is the chat the kind of question is like, is there broad agreement on that public bodies be required to break down their fees into these categories? Is that what you're kind of testing the waters on agreement on that, Tyler?
Yep, that's it.
Okay, so sounds like you got agreement with Scott. Todd?
Yeah, just to understand, Tyler, what you're saying. So right now, are you proposing seeking agreement on that costs will only be defined by these three categories of search, duplication, and review?
Yes, as I understood it from your comments, Todd, I mean, that's what the statute allows, but the statute just says reasonable. You may well know better than I. Are there unknown costs that I'm not thinking of that people fold into reasonable that go beyond those three?
That's hard to say without really surveying most public bodies, but I'm in agreement with you that I'm on board with breaking them down into these three categories and these three categories only, and not having any discussion now about how those categories would apply to specific types of requesters, but just dealing with defining the cost itself. If that makes sense. Okay.
I'm anxious or reluctant to agree to this. Like, it feels like under the existing structure of the proposal anyway, the main function of that specificity is to then work with our categories of requesters. And I think if we have the one without the other, then I'm not as comfortable with what it is exactly that we're doing. So I would want to talk more about that.
Emily, if I may.
Yeah, please.
What if we tie Tyler's concept to, and you must utilize these categories when providing a fee estimate? So that way it has purpose beyond categorizing types of requesters.
Well, let me be more blunt. What I like about the categories being in the law under the proposal that we have in front of us is that it basically says media can only be charged duplication costs, right? But for that tremendous public benefit, I'm not sure I see a benefit in adding this kind of detail into the statutes on public record costs. And I would just want to think and talk through that more.
Okay, so not immediate agreement. All right. Emily Goddard, do you want to weigh in on this at this point? No. Okay. I think I saw you shake your head no, but yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think it fits well into the discussion of categories in general. I mean, in principle, I like the idea of much more transparency in fees, because as Todd says, we don't really know what agencies charge for or don't charge for. You know, as we know from the comments on this draft, some charge for benefits of the cost of having an employee do this, and some don't. And so I'm definitely in favor of things that would provide more insight into what the costs are. I think that provides a really good groundwork for conversation, as well as just clarity. But because it does seem very tied to the whole concept of categorizing requesters, I'm not sure I can say I'd support it in isolation until we talk about requester categories further.
Emily, this is Tyler. I'm missing the link. I guess I'm trying to figure out how the definition links to the categorization. I think maybe it's helpful to just kind of go through like how I was thinking about this. I was just thinking from the public body end, being required to say, you know, here's your cost and it's broken down by these 3 categories. I guess in my mind, I didn't contemplate that would change depending on who the requester was. I mean, for public bodies, we're supposed to list actual costs anyway.
Oh,
And I don't know if that.
Yeah, no, I can totally clarify. What I mean is just because in this draft legislation, those, you know, being very specific about search, duplication, and review is the only recoverable cost would be, that's a change in law, right? And because that is put in, it directly mimics FOIA, and it also, and then the other, you know, component of directly mimicking the federal FOIA is categories of requesters. So I mean, I'm not necessarily opposed to this idea of incorporating search, duplication, and review specifically as both the, you know, the specific things you're only allowed to charge for and specifically disclosing those amounts. I just am not totally sure I can say right now that that I would fully support that, because it's specifically in this legislation and in the FOIA tied to, it's in service of separating out what different categories of requesters pay. So if we just, you know, if we all said, yes, let's approve that in the vacuum of the discussion about categorizing requesters, I don't exactly know where, like, I just need to think about it more, because I don't know if there would be something I'm missing or something like some unintended consequence, you know, because they're linked to, in the FOIA and in this concept, they're initially linked closely together. And we're clearly going to discuss the concept of categorizing requesters. Does that help? Tyler, does that make it more clear, my comments?
Yes, yeah, it does. I guess I'll just close, you know, we're not, I guess in my mind, we're not bound, right, by doing it exactly like FOIA. Even if we're borrowing sort of that language, we wouldn't be bound to do all parts of it at once. But yes, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, no, agree. We are totally not bound at all. I want to note that our DEQ representative who testified first has noted in the chat that the DEQ charges commercial requesters, but using the DAS fee schedule, which is in fact less than DEQ's actual costs. So as we were wondering what agencies, you know, really do, there is an example of potentially room to charge more if that seemed to make sense to the agency. So to summarize, these are the things I'm hearing we have agreement on, and some of them are agreement on not spending any more time on them for this go round of legislation. And some are things, there's some general agreement to probably keep in this legislation. Let me start there. General agreement to potentially keep in this legislation, or to likely keep in this legislation, would be to codify into law what's in case law already about charging the lowest possible fee, you know, based on who could do the work. I also heard general consensus on including in this legislation, again, sort of enforcing current law, that agencies post on their website if they have one, and however else, if they don't, noting, Michael, that we need to, you know, for sure hear from Mark as well. And that if they don't comply with the law, then they aren't allowed to charge fees. Those are two things that I heard there was general consensus of keeping in this proposal. I heard that we are, we don't want to continue in this legislation the idea of a general task force to look at specific transparency by design programs going forward, but that may be something that the PRAC itself does. I heard that we don't want to you know, look to raise state money, money from the general fund, or necessarily this time, because of concerns of not getting anything passed if it has a big price tag on it. And I'm not sure where we landed on the idea of setting aside the appeals timeline pieces 4 and 5. whether that's something we didn't want to, we want to set aside and not include in this legislation, or we want to discuss further. So that's what I guess I'm suggesting that what we're leaving this meeting with is agreement on those two things that I mentioned, agreement on general agreement on not having a big price tag on this, and a general agreement on taking the ideas of a transparency by design task force and putting them somewhere else as a priority. And then, yeah, on those four, which I feel pretty sure I heard right, are we all, is that right? Comments? We're missing something? Are we, again, none of this is tied in stone, but these will affect what we focus on in our conversations going forward. Anything incorrect there? Okay. And on the 4 and 5, is it 5 and 6? Anyway, the things about the appeal process.
I really hope we can agree not to do them, Emily. I certainly don't think that they are going to help us get anything passed. The other thing I would say about state funds is I would actually be willing to consider whether we want a companion bill. Like, the idea of them together is a bad one, but maybe depending on what we arrive at in terms of fee reform, it might be worth circling back around to that as a separate bill. But anyway, on the DA thing, I really hope that we can leave it, because I don't think we're going to even agree on it. So that will make it hard to sell.
I see. So like anticipating that there won't be agreement, may as well leave it be now. Is that what you're saying, Michael?
On the DA thing? Well,
yeah.
Just given that it's not really related to fees very directly at all. Yeah. I mean, if it were something that were clearly related and I wasn't sure we were going to agree, I'd want to talk about it. But I feel like this is too much of a side issue.
Okay. What do people think about that? Or do we want to agree to set aside that for some later bill? Or is that an area of agreement we have today? Emily says yes.
I think
yes.
Yes, let's table it.
Tyler says yes.
Tyler.
I agree with the group, given everything we've heard from our members, to table it for now.
Okay. Okay. And, as we say in radio journalism, nothing's final till it's on the air, and you still sometimes have to make corrections. So, it's still be an ongoing process. But before we, it sounds like we have consensus on that. I don't know that we need a vote per se, but I do want to make sure that we open it up to anybody from the public who wants to weigh in on the direction we've gone today. Okay, Nick, I saw your hand go up, and then Joe A. Barker. Nick, since you've already spoken, could we let Joe go first? Would you mind?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, please, Joe Barker.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I apologize for having my speaker open earlier in the meeting. Secondly, I do agree with a lot of the points, and one of the things that when I was reading Steve Suo's SUO comment this morning, is this sort of like reminded me of the early 13 colonies, where they each had their own different coinage, and they couldn't determine the price of goods because it was all different. So, I'm not a big advocate for one size fits all, but I do think that if there is a straight across the board fee schedule, lowest cost salary employee starting at, $25, use dashed numbers and go from there. Stipulate a specific cost per page, whether it's black and white color, 11 by 14, whatever, it would make it a lot clearer for someone say like from California, if there was a company in California that had several businesses or contacts in Portland, Medford, they could contact these two companies or entities and know what their actual price is going to be. In my mind, that's the clearest transparency possible. But I know Mr. Crone doesn't really approve of the one size fits all, and I could be completely wrong in understanding that. I do think that the public policy benefit does need to be stipulated with clarity, not just to include a records request form and say, well, you know, our policy's in the form. No, there actually has to be a full-blown document. But thank you for allowing me to babble on the 13 colonies.
Yeah, thank you for joining us and your continued interest in the subject. Since you mentioned Michael Crone, I'm gonna just offer you, Michael, the chance to speak. I think, Joe, what you've been hearing from a number of members of the committee is that because there are, throughout our discussions all the time, is that because there are many different sizes of government agencies, all of which have to be responsive to public requests and all of which have different budget realities. There are some really big pools, and then there's some like tiny volunteer boards. And so you have heard, I'm sure, a great deal of discussion of, how would any given policy affect a variety of different agencies that would need to comply with the law. But just Michael, since you were named directly, would you care to jump in?
Well, I didn't really hear much that I objected to. I definitely, what I understood Ms. Barker to be suggesting is that I don't think that every requester should be treated the same in terms of the fees they pay. And I think that is definitely true. And other people may have different views of that. But from my perspective, there's a difference between someone who's looking for public records so that they can repackage and sell them and make a profit, turn a profit, and someone who's looking for public records so that they can educate people in the community about what's going on in their government. And to me, one of those things is something that I don't feel a need for the public to subsidize, and the other is something that seems like a worthy thing to subsidize or to even just pay for. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I didn't take any offense, certainly, to what she said.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Joe. Nick Budnick.
Great. Thanks very much. First, I want to compliment you on the depth and nuance of this conversation. I think it really is a credit to the council, and I think it's great having sat in on those legislative hearings and the work group. It's great to see this actually working as intended. And one of the issues that you talked about was sort of how the fiscal cost of these requests is not necessarily reflective of the reality. And of course, part of that is that the time expenditure involved in these requests, as I think Scott and Emily alluded to. So I just wanted to encourage you to think about how fee waivers, even though the state's formula or system encourages people to think of fee waivers as a loss of money, I want to encourage you to think about how fee waivers can be used to save the state and local government's time and money. And back in July of 2018, Cameron Miles of the Legislative Counsel's office spoke to the PRAC about how he used fee waivers to, as I understand it, save time and money for the taxpayers of Oregon. And it honestly, it was a comment that drew a lot of seeming acceptance from the local government folks that I spoke to, and it became the basis for legislation that we introduced with Representative Karin Power last year, which was designed to empower public records gatekeepers to use fee waivers to reduce the time and money spent on requests, and to give them the clear legislative intent and authority that they engage with the public, and that both sides, including the requester, engage in a constructive discussion to have a more efficient system. And I just want to encourage you all to think about fee waivers as not necessarily a cost, but as a way to save money if appropriately used by a well-meaning public servant, as often is done already, but it's not institutionalized, and that's where I think legislation could play a great role. We've submitted longer comments in writing. In there, you'll also see a link to a video that I also dropped into the chat. It's a 5-minute video that talks about how how public records access can actually save money. In this one instance that the video talks about, it saved the state more than $13 million. And of course, that doesn't show up in any public records fee calculation. It'd be great if that $13 million was, handed off to local governments to help fund transparency. But anyway, it's a really, I think, interesting video with comment from Oregon Department of Justice, and I'd commend it to you if you have 5 minutes for that thought exercise. Thank you so much for your efforts. That's all I've got, unless you have questions.
Just to clarify, Nick, the link to that video, I see you dropped it in the chat. It's also in the written testimony that's submitted and I think now posted on the website. Is that right? Is it posted, Todd? That you guys submitted it today? Okay. All right. That's great, because that chat, it disappears. Thank you. Are there? I think we're all done with the hands. Okay. I just see the hands of the two people who already spoke. So if there's somebody else who wants to speak, please go ahead and make yourself known. But I just want to encourage people to step out of your boxes. I'm encouraging myself to do that as well, and really look to what we can do as a state to make this process work better, and consider the costs and benefits most broadly. This discussion of fees and costs of public records has gone on for a number of years here in Oregon with very little change and very little progress, even though it continues to be cited as a thorn in everybody's side. So I feel like we're at a really great opportunity here. And I really appreciate the spirit people brought today of focus. What are we really trying to talk about here? And I really appreciate that people spelled out their questions and concerns in writing, so that we're all really clear about where we're starting from. I think there's really fruitful discussions to be had, and I just really want to encourage everybody to look at where you can move. Look at what can serve the greater good, and not cause harm, but move forward. I just want to really encourage that. That is how good public policy is made, and we have the chance to potentially, try an improvement. So there's my little soapbox as your chair, but I really do mean that. So I hope people have the chance to, before our next meetings, spend some time with everybody else's thoughts and give it some deep consideration. Talk to your constituents, see what ideas they have of where we can make this system better. With that, I think we can probably end. We'll send out the calendar and then the more specific breakdown of what we're going to talk about, and and a summary of today's meeting, as well as that, just so no one has to re-listen to the video to know where we stand. As far as the tentative steps or the general consensus on a few things that we came to today. Any closing comments from anybody? Anybody want to add anything before a motion to adjourn? Yeah, Todd.
I was going to ask, will you do another excellent job of marking up a new version of this concept, and maybe for the 2 areas that we agreed on, and the area that we agreed to keep, and the area that we agreed to remove, maybe just clean it up so that for the 2 concepts we agreed on, we don't necessarily need comments there, and for the section that we agreed can go, maybe removing that just for ease of working through this document.
Yeah, for sure.
And thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? I still see Nick and Joe's hands up, but I'm assuming that's from the past.
No, ma'am. I'm sorry. I had lowered my hand, but I raised it again.
Oh.
Will other people's comments be posted on the website for us outsiders to read?
Oh, anybody who sends written testimony to the committee, it all gets posted. It's all there already. So yes, lots of people who are public servants, journalists,
Okay,
lawyers have already published, put their comments up there, and they're all available. Yes.
all right, thank
And
you.
you're welcome to submit written testimony, of course, as well.
Okay, thank you, madam.
Yeah, and we're reading those. Those are not getting incorporated into this document per se, but those are one of the sources that all the members of the subcommittee are drawing on to inform their thinking and proposals. Okay, anybody have a motion to adjourn?
Wait,
So moved.
Emily, this is Tyler. Can
Oh.
I put in one more comment?
Of course.
I just wanted to say thank you. It's incredibly difficult to wrangle a bunch of different people's ideas. You've done an excellent job. And I also just wanted to tell the group, I've been in a number of these work groups. I think there is a palpable sense with this group that we're all trying to get to yes and be solution oriented, and extremely grateful for that. So all the way from Salt Lake City, thank you all.
Thank you, Tyler. Appreciate that. I have that sense as well. Okay. Any motion to adjourn? I think, Todd, you were about to do that.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, great. All in favor?
Hi.
Aye.
All right.
Hi.
See you all the 7th. Have a happy
Bye, everyone.
end of summer. Bye.
Bye.